What is your advice to aviators, whether it be general aviators, military aviators?
Don't do anything stupid.
Today is Veterans Day as of posting this video. And what better way to celebrate this day than to do a very special interview of my own dear sweet grandpappy, the retired Lieutenant Colonel Dick Jonas of the United States Air Force. Now, without further ado, let us go into this interview so that he may regale us of the tales of military life and, of course, flying.
My name is Dick Jonas. I was born and raised in northern Florida, way down upon the Swanee River. I went all 12 years to school in the same red brick building. In 1965, I graduated from Valdosta State College. We used to have an Air Force recruiter that he spent a lot of time hanging around the student center. And he'd come slide into a booth there, and this guy was a smooth talker. He would say stuff like, hey, I can get you a commission. When you graduate, I can make you a second lieutenant. And he says, not only that, but I can send you to pilot training, and you could go fly Air Force airplanes. Well, that was really right up my alley. That's what I wanted to do, was to be a flyer. And I thought to myself, hey, he's lying. He can't do all of that stuff. But you know what? That is exactly what happened to me. I got a commission as a second lieutenant, went off to Lackland Air Force Base down in San Antonio, Texas, to attend officer training school, where I learned how to be a second lieutenant. And then from there, I went back to one of the pilot training bases. Flight school was a year long. Took a whole year to get all the way through. The airplanes I flew were got 30 hours in the T-41, which is like a Cessna 172. And then we moved over to the T-37, which is a little twin jet trainer, side by side. It had two engines. The student usually sat on the left side, and the instructor sat on the right side up in the cockpit. I got 90 hours in that, and then we moved over to the T-38, which was a supersonic airplane. In fact, on our dollar ride, that's the first ride you get in a new airplane. We went up, and my instructor that day was the flight commander for my class. And he took me up, and we climbed up to 42,000 feet, leveled that thing out, and it was a beautiful, clear South Georgia day. Lit the afterburner. The T-38 had an afterburner. Had two afterburners because it had two engines. Just let that thing zing out to a Mach 1.1. And then we wound up getting, I think about 120 hours, I believe, in the T-38. And then I got assigned to, at first I got assigned to the C-130. I was going to go fly C-130s. Then the Air Force changed the block of assignments, and most of the guys who were graduating pilot training at that time went to the back seat of the F-4. So my first assignment was PWSO, Pilot Weapon System Operator. And that was my job as a Phantom. In the Phantom, I was a pilot, and my wings looked just like the wings on the chest of the guy in the front seat. But my job was a little bit different. My job was to find the enemy and lock onto him with the radar and tell the guy in the front seat, hey, your trigger is hot, go ahead and shoot this guy down. The F-4 was fun to fly because I did my combat tour, 125 combat missions in Vietnam, as a backseat pilot in the F-4. And then I came home to an upgrade slot. And I moved out of the back seat of the Phantom into the front seat, and took about 6 months and about 100 hours of flying time to get good at flying the front seat of the Phantom. Well, after I upgraded to the front seat of the Phantom, as I said, I was sent to Holloman Air Force Base over in Alamogordo, New Mexico. just outside, about 7 miles west of Alamogordo. And I was there for, I think, about a year and a half. But I wanted to go overseas, and I had convinced my family that that was a good idea, is to go overseas. So I put in my dream sheet that I wanted to go to Germany. I wanted to go to Europe and spend some time over there. And my second choice, of course, was Japan. And I wound up getting my second choice. So we moved to Japan, and I was stationed over there for a total of 3 years. At first, we went to northern Japan, to Misawa Air Base. Then at about 6 months or so after I got there, they decided to close down the fighter wing. And so they sent the airplanes, a bunch of F-4Ds, over to Kunsan Air Base in South Korea. And those of us who had already had a remote tour of duty, which meant that you went off and served a year or close to it, at a different base where you couldn't take your family with you. And my combat tour in Thailand counted as a remote tour. So me and several other guys who were in the same situation, we wound up going down to Kadena Air Base on Okinawa, which is in southern Japan, and wound up staying there for, I don't know, another 2 or 3 years. I was over there for a long time, several years. And while I was there, I got to go to the fighter weapons school at Nellis. So that was a 3-month school, and it happened in 1972. So I went on temporary duty, TDY we called it, to Nellis to attend the fighter weapons school. I didn't exactly burn up the program. I graduated number 13 out of 13 pilots. But that's okay, I graduated, and I got to wear the patch on my sleeve of my flight suit. I was really proud of that, still am. What you learn in the fighter weapons school is how to teach other people in your squadron. You go back to your home squadron, and your job at that point is to teach other fighter pilots how to take this airplane out and fight with it. So that was an interesting job, and I enjoyed doing that at 2 or 3 different bases. My squadron, which was the 44th Tactical Fighter Squadron, went from Kadena Air Base on Okinawa over to Chingchuan-Kang Air Base, also known as CCK, because it was a lot easier to pronounce, on Taiwan. And I learned to really love the Taiwanese people. They were friendly. They were on our side, which was paramount. And of course, by that time, the communists had taken over mainland China. Mao Zedong was still alive at that time. I came from Kadena to Luke Air Force Base and became an instructor in the 426th Squadron, TAC Fighter Training Squadron, in the Phantom. I was an instructor pilot in the Phantom for about a year and a half, I think. And then from there, I went to Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, where I was assigned an LMD. I flew an LMD. That stands for Large Metal Desk. So I was doing my staff tour. Every fighter pilot, at some point in your career, they made you get out of the cockpit and go sit behind the desk so that you'll know how the rest of the Air Force works. And I'll be honest with you, I learned more about the Air Force flying that LMD than I did flying the Phantom. Although I learned a lot flying the Phantom too. Don't get me wrong. The good old Air Force. I mean, I did a staff tour of 3 years long as a personnel staff officer. My job in that behind that LMD was assigning pilots to cockpits. And then I went to staff school. I finished my staff tour, and they sent me to staff school. And the staff school they sent me to was as an exchange officer to the Army Staff School at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. by this time I was writing songs. In fact, I started writing songs when I was doing my combat tour. And I wrote my first songs about flying and fighting during the combat tour. But I just kept on writing songs, and you know, when something would happen, or I'd fly a new airplane or something like that, I'd write a song about it. And so when we finished up with the Army Staff School, I got stationed got sent to Nellis Air Force Base. When I was stationed at Nellis, we traded in our F-4s for F-16s. I was out one day I was an instructor pilot by this time in the F-16, and I was out doing IP duties one day, chasing this young captain on a practice, and in our squadron we'd always give our youngsters a practice tack check with an instructor chasing them through the whole profile. And so I chased this guy. His name was Mike. He was a captain. I was a lieutenant colonel by this time. And so we flew down to the North Tack Range at Gila Bend, near Gila Bend, Arizona. And he came in. His timing was good on the low-level nav route. The bomb was good. It was right on the target. And then I fanned out behind him as he moved out to the downwind to come in for another pass. I was going to drop the next time through. And just as I rolled wings level about 3 miles behind Mike, I get this horrendous racket in the back of the airplane somewhere. Had no idea what it was. I just never experienced that before flying a fighter at all. I checked all the gauges, the engine gauges, and everything is unwinding. Scared the hell out of me. I zoomed the airplane up from traffic pattern altitude or bomb pattern altitude. Got up to about 5,000 feet, put it in a glide. The F-16 glides at 210 knots. And I tried to restart, knowing in my heart it was not going to restart, and sure enough, it didn't. So by this time, we're back down to 2,000 feet above the ground, and the flight manual says if you're at 2,000 feet above the ground and the engine's dead, punch out. So I did. I reached down and grabbed that little ejection handle between my legs on the front of that seat, gave it a good positive yank. First thing that happens in the ejection sequence is the canopy comes off, leaves you sitting in an open cockpit. But then the next thing that happens right after that is there's a cannon shell without the shell in it at the base of that seat that fires, and it scoots that seat up the rails, and you clear the cockpit. At 2,000 feet above the ground out on a gunnery range, everything's automatic. You can pull that handle and die, and it'll still put you under a blossom parachute before you hit the ground. So everything worked like it was supposed to, and I hit the ground, did a tumble, and by that time there's a helicopter out there to pick me up. The humorous ending to this whole situation was what had happened to the airplane was a compressor blade out of the front end of the engine had gone back through that engine. It slipped out of the track where it was mounted, going back through that engine, and just corn-cottoned it. It weren't going to compress any more air. So they called it materiel failure, and I heaved a big sigh of relief that I hadn't done anything stupid to kill that airplane. They asked me if I would like to have some souvenirs. I said, sure. So they gave me the stick and the throttle, the clock, the ejection handle, and they gave me a little placard off the engine that says, Pratt & Whitney, dependable engines. And it had been the engine that killed the airplane. When I left Nellis, I went to Korea to be the chief of safety for the 8th Fighter Wing. That was the second time I'd been stationed with the 8th Fighter Wing. And that was a 1-year-long tour of duty. When it was over, I got to my last tour of active duty before I retired from this service. And I came back to South Carolina, was reassigned to the South Carolina Air National Guard. At that time, they would appoint a regular Air Force officer to be the advisor to the guard units. Each individual guard unit had its own They called him the RAFSOB, which stands for Regular Air Force Son of a Bitch. But anyhow, I tried to go be an airline pilot and flunked out, didn't make it. So I became a junior ROTC instructor in 2 different Arizona high schools. Probably the most worthwhile thing I ever did in the uniform, really.
When learning to fly in general, and like anything in flying, was there any challenges that you had, and how did you overcome them?
Learning to fly an airplane, and especially the airplanes I learned how to fly in, they were hot jets. The T-37 it'd fly. I think the slowest you wanted to fly the T-37 was about 90 knots. The T-38 final approach speed of T-38 was what? Probably 125 or 40, something like that. The F-4 and the F-16, it was about 150, 160 knots when you were getting ready to come in and land, because you want to land as slow as possible, and that was always a challenge to get the airspeed right. And it meant that you needed a good, what we call an instrument cross check. That's where your eyeballs, you're looking outside, you're looking for the runway down there out in front of you, and you're also sweeping your eyes across the gauges in the cockpit so you can keep track of how fast you're going and make sure that you're as slow as you dare to be, so that you can touch down as slow as possible. What do you do about it? Practice, 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 practice. In the T-37, we got 90 hours in that. The missions were always around an hour, maybe a little better long. So I got 90 different flights in that thing. And then the T-38 was 120 hours. So that would have been a little over 100 missions in that, to where you're learning how to keep that cross-check going, looking outside, looking inside, being aware of where you are. You know, what if you're landing someplace else? And we had a chance to do that. We took off solo in our airplanes and flew to Brookley Field in Alabama. And then after it got dark, we took off and we flew back to Moody Air Force Base, where our base was, in the dark. I don't know how many other guys did it, but I got reasonably close back to Moody. And I popped up a little bit, and I tuned in the navigation radio station. It was called TACAN at Moody. And that way, I got a lock on with my TACAN set in the cockpit. And it says, your runway is in that direction. So I just turned and headed in that direction. And then, you know, an air base at night has a different lighting configuration. You got red lights that go all the way down either side of the runway. And then the approach lights are a different color, and they are a different configuration. So when you get over the base, you know you're over the base. You're home.
What is the coolest plane you ever flew?
The coolest. It's a toss-up between the F-4 and the F-16, because I went to war in the F-4. I mean, that old bear just really took good care of me, and I'll always be grateful for that. We struck a target up in southern Laos one time. We went in and they shot the crap out of us. It was a transshipment point. The bad guys would bring equipment and supplies, bombs, beans, and bullets down from North Vietnam to this place called Chipon, which is a little village in southern Laos. And then the Viet Cong over in country in South Vietnam would come out there and pick up the bombs, beans, and bullets and take them back in to fight the war in South Vietnam. And we rolled in, we made 2 passes apiece from our 2-ship flight. When we got ready, when we finished striking a target, we started heading for home. And we had been working under the control of a forward air controller. He was flying a little bug smasher type airplane. And he had gone in and marked the target. And he said, when he went in and marked the target with a white phosphorus rocket, and he said, that's your target, hit it. And then he says, I'll be waiting for you over here behind the karst. Karst is mountains. And the first time down the slide, I figured out why he was waiting behind the karst, because they shot the crap out of us. It was mainly 37 millimeter. And it was going over the wings and under the wings and by the canopy, and I was scared shitless. I don't see how in the world they missed. But we never took a single hit. So anyhow, we made 2 passes and then we head for home. The FAC, the forward air controller, gave us what they call the BDA, bomb damage assessment. He says, when you guys, you knocked out 3 trucks and blah, blah, blah. And he said, then I'll give you 4,000 rounds of AAA. AAA is anti-aircraft artillery. So his estimate, and he was probably pretty good at estimating that kind of thing. How do you count 4,000 rounds of bullets, you know? Well, later on I got thinking about that. That meant that those bastards on the ground shot 4,000 times at us and missed every time. They never connected, not even once. And we wound up, the 4 guys, 2 guys in each airplane, we wound up getting a Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism. It says, you guys got shot at 4,000 times and they missed every time, so you're a hero. Whatever. I was just only too grateful not to have been hit. The F-16, it was very, very maneuverable. And it would accelerate. It was really, really a slick fuselage. It was a clean machine. 2/3 of the way through a mission, the F-16 would have burned enough gas that it was now had a thrust-to-weight ratio of greater than 1. If the airplane weighed, let's say, 25,000 pounds, and you had burnt most of your gas, you were getting 30,000 pounds of thrust out of the engine, and your airplane only weighed 25,000 pounds, she would accelerate like a bandit. Before I retired, they checked me out as an FCF pilot. FCF means functional check flight. And what that means is you put an airplane in the hangar, and periodically you got to go over it, check everything out, any bolts and nuts and stuff that need replacing, you replace, blah, blah, blah. And then when that thing is they're done overhauling it, essentially, they bring it out, and a pilot has got to go take that thing up and make sure it's all right, that it ain't going to kill somebody, you know. Probably among the most thrilling things I've ever done in an airplane was the takeoff profile on an FCF flight. And the way you do that is you taxi the airplane. It's clean. There's nothing hanging on it, no fuel tanks, nothing, except the wingtip missile rails is all that's on it externally. So it's really light to start with. You hold the brakes and run the engine up to 85%, because if you run it higher than 85%, it'll slip the tires on the rims, and you can't have that, you know. So when you're satisfied that the engine is going to run, at least for a while, so you drop your heels to the floor and smack that thing in the full afterburner. In about 800 feet, it flies. It's ready to fly. And so you just hold it down just above the asphalt and let that thing accelerate. By the time you get to the far end of the runway, you're doing about 400 knots. So you just reef that thing back. It was about a 7G pull up into the vertical, and you go straight up for 2.5 miles, nautical miles, 15,000 feet. And then you put it over on its back like that. You look out the top of the canopy, and you're looking at the runway that you just took off on. And the reason why you do that profile, then you roll it out and proceed with the profile, unless you lose the engine. If you lose the engine here, you can, at any point in this takeoff profile, you can put that thing right back down on that same strip of concrete that you just took off on. you're flying an airplane that just came out of the garage, for Christ's sake. And you want to make sure that if the engine quits, that you can put it back down without having to jump out of it. Among the items that you'd check would be you'd slow it down to about 170 knots. And then you wanted to know if it would tolerate, if the engine would tolerate a full throttle transit. You pull the throttle to idle, and you're going slow, which means the engine is not turning all that fast. And then you just slam that thing into full afterburner. If the engine is trimmed up and is working like it's supposed to, it just goes ahead and accelerates, lights the afterburner, and it'll have you doing supersonic shortly. But if the engine is not trimmed properly, about the time it gets to about the afterburner range, you'll get a burner blowout. And it sounds like you had an explosion in the airplane. It goes wham! And of course you pull the throttle to idle and you fly straight back home and you land out of an engine out traffic pattern. I've had a couple of compressor stalls like that. But another thing you did, the F-16s, the ones I flew, the A models, A and B, would do Mach 1.5, 1.5 times the speed of sound. I think they're up to Mach 2 now, I think, but I'm not sure about that. I'd have to do some research. One of the maneuvers you do is a Mach run. You want to make sure that this thing will no shit do a Mach and a half. So you climb it up to 40,000 feet or so, light the afterburner, and just put it in a gentle dive, a little shallow dive, so that the airplane is not trying to stay up, it's just going to accelerate. Just watch the speedometer until it gets to 1.5, and then, okay, she'll do it. And slow down and go back home. That was fun. Flying fighters was fun.
What is your advice to aviators, whether it be general aviators, military aviators?
Don't do anything stupid. Make sure you know your machine, you know how to fly it, and don't do anything stupid, because if you do, it'll kill you. And if you fly it correctly, fly it by the book. Don't exceed the limitations that the book specifies. It'll serve you well, and it'll be a fun thing to do. And you won't have to pay nobody several $1 million because you broke his airplane.